Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. A millionaire dentist, a safari in Africa, a sudden gunshot. Hours later, his wife's body was cremated, half a world away from home. And just weeks after that, he moved in with his longtime mistress. But something in the ashes refused to stay quiet, and the FBI was listening. October 2016, Zambia. Nestled inside the vast wilderness of Kafue National Park sits a private hunting lodge reserved for elite clients, wealthy travelers from abroad seeking trophy game and complete seclusion. Dr. Larry Rudolph, a prominent dentist from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was one of them. He had made this trip several times before with his wife, Bianca. They were avid hunters, registered firearm owners, and regulars in the exotic hunting community. On the morning of October 11th, their trip was about to end. The couple had spent 2 weeks in Zambia and were preparing to fly home. Bianca had been organizing their weapons, gear, and clothing in their shared lodge. Then, a single shotgun blast rang out. Within minutes, she was dead. Larry told the local safari staff and authorities that the gun had accidentally discharged while Bianca was attempting to pack it. He claimed the Remington over-under 12-gauge shotgun, hers, had gone off unexpectedly as she tried to place it into its case. He said he was in the bathroom at the time. When he heard the shot, he ran out and found her on the floor, bleeding heavily. No one else witnessed the shooting, no video, no audio, no 911 equivalent call to Zambian emergency services, just Larry's verbal account. By the time Zambian authorities arrived, the scene had already been altered. Bianca's body had been moved. Larry had begun making arrangements. The police collected a basic report, accepted Larry's story, and allowed the process to move forward without a formal homicide investigation. The cause of death was recorded as accidental gunshot wound to the chest. But what happened next raised red flags far beyond Zambia. Within 2 days, Bianca's body was cremated. No autopsy was conducted, no second opinion, no family members present. The death certificate and cremation paperwork were couriered to Lusaka, signed off, and processed. By October 13th, Bianca was gone. To the Zambian officials, the matter was over. But to people in the U.S., especially Bianca's close friends and family, the story didn't make sense. Bianca Rudolph was a devout Catholic. Her friends would later tell investigators she believed strongly in traditional burial. One of them, a woman named Karen Green, had known her since college. Karen later told the FBI, she always said she wanted to be buried next to her mother. Always. She would never have chosen cremation, especially not in a foreign country, alone. Karen wasn't the only one who noticed the strangeness. Bianca's brother Vincent, a financial planner in New York, immediately began asking questions. Why the rush? Why no autopsy? Why was the only version of the incident coming from the man who stood to gain the most? And that question, the one about motive, grew louder in the months ahead. Larry Rudolph, upon returning to the U.S., filed claims totaling more than $4.8 million across 7 different life insurance policies taken out on Bianca. Some had been signed and adjusted mere months before her death. The largest policy was $1.5 million from a national carrier based in Colorado. Each payout listed Larry as the sole beneficiary. Individually, the claims weren't illegal. But the pattern, the timeline, the swiftness, the contradictions caught the attention of a senior fraud investigator from one of the insurance companies. That individual referred the case to the FBI's Denver field office. The bureau didn't act immediately, but they logged it, flagged it, and they watched. Meanwhile, Larry wasn't grieving, at least not publicly. Within 3 months of Bianca's death, he was seen living in Phoenix, Arizona, with a woman named Lori Milleron, a longtime employee of his dental practice. Lori wasn't a stranger to Bianca. In fact, Lori had worked closely with Larry for over a decade. Some colleagues had whispered about the nature of their relationship, but it was never confirmed, until now. From the outside, the optics were unsettling. A man loses his wife in a foreign country under murky circumstances, collects millions, and moves in with his employee, all within the same fiscal quarter. Bianca's family watched from the sidelines, stunned and powerless. They couldn't bring her back, but they could raise hell. In 2019, almost 3 years after Bianca's death, the FBI formally opened a criminal investigation. The investigation was slow, methodical, and under wraps. The agents had one major challenge. Bianca's body no longer existed. There was no forensic autopsy, no blood spatter analysis, no crime scene photographs beyond a few taken by Zambian staff. But what the FBI lacked in forensic remains, they began to recover in documentation. They subpoenaed insurance applications, correspondence between Larry and the insurance brokers, travel itineraries, financial records tied to Lori Milleran's statements from employees of the lodge in Zambia. They also spoke to the U.S. Embassy official who had assisted Larry in the cremation process. That official described him as agitated, focused, and very specific. One line from the report stood out. He was insistent. He didn't want delays. He kept saying, "I just want to get this over with." By mid-2020, the picture was beginning to take shape. But the case needed more than suspicion. It needed a trigger, a witness, a statement, a forensic entry point. That break came from a bar in Phoenix. Do you believe a man grieving the loss of his wife would arrange a cremation within 2 days, overseas, without informing her family? Long before the headlines, before the courtrooms and the accusations, Dr. Lawrence Rudolph was seen as a success story. He built a dental empire from the ground up, Three Rivers Dental, with clinics across Pennsylvania and patients that included wealthy clients and celebrities. On paper, he was the definition of upward mobility, polished, confident, charming. His income was well into the millions by the early 2000s. He had the kind of life people posted about, but he didn't. His wife, Bianca, wasn't just along for the ride. She was involved, disciplined, and fiercely loyal. A devout Catholic with a sharp mind and strong opinions, she managed much of the household's personal affairs while Larry ran the practice. Friends described her as pragmatic and grounded. She didn't chase luxury, but she didn't shy away from it either. Their lives were full of travel, hunting trips, and appearances at professional events. To acquaintances, they looked like a solid pair, wealthy, accomplished, and unshaken by decades of marriage. But it wasn't that simple, and when federal investigators later dug into their relationship, the cracks were already there, deep ones. According to records reviewed by the FBI during the early phase of the inquiry, Larry had purchased multiple life insurance policies on Bianca over the span of several years. Most notably, 2 of the largest policies were updated in 2015, less than a year before Bianca's death in Zambia. These weren't casual updates. They included detailed beneficiary language, clauses about accidental death, and accelerated payout options. Agents flagged these revisions immediately. It's worth noting, no law prohibits someone from taking out life insurance on their spouse. It's not illegal. But when the policies are adjusted shortly before the insured dies and the beneficiary moves on quickly, emotionally and financially, it raises questions. Questions like, what kind of marriage was this? Larry was a known trophy hunter. Records from the Safari Club International show he had hunted across multiple continents, amassing dozens of documented kills: lions, leopards, buffalo, antelope. He often attended hunting expos in Las Vegas and Dallas. Bianca, to some degree, shared this interest. She was licensed, she had training, and she had hunted before. But friends say the enthusiasm wasn't mutual. One colleague remembered, she did it because it was what Larry loved, but she never talked about it like he did. This difference would matter later because, according to Larry, the shotgun that killed Bianca was her own. He insisted she was packing it when it discharged. But here's the thing, Bianca was not inexperienced with firearms. She had taken hunter safety courses. She knew how to carry and pack a shotgun. According to FBI field notes, this was a key friction point during early forensic review. Experienced shooter, controlled environment, no external threat. Accidental discharge under these circumstances is unlikely without external manipulation. And then there was Lori. Lori Milleran had been Larry's office manager and assistant for over 15 years. She worked at the flagship Three Rivers location in Pittsburgh. By 2016, she was no longer just managing the practice. She was deeply enmeshed in Larry's day-to-day life. She coordinated his meetings, arranged business travel, and according to several former employees, frequently attended industry events alone with him. Some staff had voiced quiet concerns. One hygienist told investigators that Lori's authority seemed to grow oddly fast, and that Larry had once shut down a complaint against her with, "She runs the show when I'm not here." Publicly, nothing was confirmed. But in 2017, just months after Bianca's cremation, Larry sold his Pittsburgh home and moved full-time to Phoenix, Arizona, where Lori was already residing. It didn't take long for the two to be seen living together. The optics were difficult to ignore. From the perspective of the federal case team, these moves were more than circumstantial. They formed the motive layer. Larry had wealth, access, and the freedom to build a new life. Bianca had been part of the picture for decades. Lori represented the future. By late 2020, investigators compiled a rough behavioral timeline. From 2006 to 2016, Larry and Lori had allegedly been engaged in an off-book personal relationship. Bianca was likely aware of something, but according to close friends, she refused to divorce. Karen Green, Bianca's closest friend, told the FBI that Bianca once confided in her, "He's never leaving her, but I don't want to give up my life." It's a tragic footnote. Bianca may have sensed the betrayal but chose to preserve what stability she had. This adds weight to what we now know about her final days. She wasn't just on safari. She was traveling with her husband after more than 30 years of complicated marriage, possibly aware that the relationship was fraying in ways she couldn't repair. And there's one more detail. In Larry's own statements to investigators, both before and after the formal indictment, he repeatedly emphasized that Bianca wanted to come on the Zambia trip, that it was her idea, and that she was excited to go hunting again. But when the FBI checked flight records and booking notes through the Zambian hunting guide service, they discovered Larry had booked the trip solo months in advance. Bianca was added as a secondary passenger only a few weeks before departure. Federal agents began to take notice of a broader pattern. Larry's behavior wasn't careless. It was strategic. The life insurance policies, the trip timing, the cremation request, the relocation, the woman waiting in Phoenix. One special agent made a note in his field report. The data aligned too cleanly. Every logistical piece moved without resistance. In complex crimes, clean stories are often a sign something's been bleached. We don't know what Bianca thought during that trip, but based on records, she arrived in Zambia alive and left in an urn. Zambia didn't have a crime scene unit, no formal homicide protocol. The lodge where Bianca Rudolph died was remote, more than 3 hours from the nearest forensic team and well outside the reach of American standards of post-mortem investigation. When the fatal shot was fired, only 2 people were present. One of them left in an urn. The other told a story that, on the surface, seemed plausible, until the FBI got their hands on the weapon. The shotgun was a Remington Model 682, an over-under 12 gauge with a long-standing reputation among hunters for its reliability and safety. It belonged to Bianca. That much was not in dispute. She had used it before, and according to travel records provided by the Zambian Professional Hunters Association, she had declared it properly upon entering the country. But when FBI agents reconstructed the scene using a similar weapon back in the States, the narrative began to fall apart. Larry told Zambian authorities that Bianca had been trying to pack the shotgun into a soft-sided case. He claimed she must have failed to check whether the chamber was clear and that it accidentally discharged when she was zipping the bag. He said he was in the bathroom at the time and ran out when he heard the blast. On its face, the explanation was simple, if not oddly convenient. But agents quickly identified 3 critical flaws in the story. First, the Remington 682 requires deliberate action to fire. The safety must be disengaged, the firearm must be cocked, and the trigger must be pulled with pressure. These aren't automatic functions. They don't just slip when the weapon is moved. Second, the gun was found in a zipped case, not partially inserted. According to the Zambian police report, the shotgun was already inside the bag when it was examined post-incident. There was no sign of a shell casing in the area where Bianca allegedly began packing it, suggesting that either the casing was removed or the gun was packed after the discharge. Third, and most important, the direction of the wound was not consistent with a downward accident. The entry wound was to the left side of Bianca's chest, angled slightly upward. She was right-handed. The FBI had no access to the body, but they had access to photos. Images taken by Zambian officials showed the positioning of Bianca's arms, the spatter pattern, and the blast location on the surrounding wall. While rudimentary, they were enough to prompt a full forensic reconstruction. In a controlled environment, Bureau analysts recreated the described movements using a Remington shotgun, multiple types of carrying cases, and a gel dummy. In none of the trials did the firearm discharge without intentional trigger pull. And in none did the shot result in an upward blast toward the shooter's chest if the weapon had been inside the bag. According to internal memos, the investigators ruled the accidental discharge scenario as mechanically improbable. A technician wrote, "Even if the trigger caught on the zipper or lining, highly unlikely, The position of the entry wound is not physically possible based on the layout. With no physical body, the FBI leaned heavily on physics. They traced the angle, calculated the height differential, and compared Bianca's known arm reach against the dimensions of the weapon. The results showed that for the blast to hit where it did, the barrel would have had to be positioned level with her chest, pointed directly at her, and fired from a distance of no more than 2 to 3 feet. That was not packing a gun. That was facing one. No witnesses, no autopsy, but the trajectory didn't lie. The agents didn't say it outright. They couldn't. The evidence was circumstantial, but as the working theory evolved within the case file, a phrase kept recurring. Staged accident. The timeline was already suspicious. Cremation within 48 hours, $4.8 million in insurance policies, the rapid move to Phoenix. Now the mechanics of the weapon aligned with a deliberate act, not a tragic mistake. A crime scene doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And if you know how to listen to physical facts, you start to hear it. Bianca's friends had their own questions. They didn't understand guns, but they understood her instincts. Bianca had been careful, precise. She didn't rush with weapons, especially not while traveling. It had never made sense to them that she would be careless enough to shoot herself while zipping a bag. When they learned, months later, that the FBI had disproved that possibility, it didn't bring comfort. It brought confirmation. It also brought urgency. The agents knew they were building a case without a key forensic pillar, the body. That meant every other angle had to hold. The shotgun was one of them. It became the cornerstone. In the report summary, the lead investigator noted, if the gun didn't misfire, someone pulled the trigger, and the only other person present was the beneficiary of multiple insurance policies. That was the kind of observation that didn't get set on the record, but didn't go away either. Every murder case hinges on one simple question. Is the story supported by the evidence? If not, what's missing or what's being hidden? In this case, the story was that Bianca packed her own shotgun and accidentally shot herself through the chest from an unnatural angle, inside a zipped bag, while her husband was in the next room. The evidence said otherwise. What do you think matters more? Who tells the story, or what the physical evidence refuses to ignore? By October 2016, less than 2 weeks after Bianca Rudolph's sudden death in Zambia, her body had already been cremated. No second autopsy, no family delay, no hesitation. For someone who had supposedly died from a tragic hunting accident, the timeline was unusually efficient. Too efficient. Federal investigators in the U.S. began piecing together the timeline the moment the insurance claim was filed. Larry Rudolph had submitted the paperwork barely days after his return. It was a staggering policy total. 5 insurance payouts totaling $4,088 million. All claims listed accidental death. All documents were notarized. All signatures were in place. But the neatness of the process is what triggered the first red flag. There was no chaos, just control. The first agency to raise an eyebrow was Mutual of Omaha. A representative reviewing the paperwork noted the accelerated cremation, done overseas, without local authority oversight from U.S. Consular Services. In Bianca's case, this meant no American post-mortem, no independent photographic documentation of the wound, just a single death certificate from a Zambian physician and a cremation approval signed off at lightning speed. The FBI opened a formal inquiry under Title 18, Section 119, foreign murder of a U.S. national. This allowed them to treat the death as a potential homicide, even though it occurred outside the United States. And then came the first major fracture in Larry's story. The position of the gunshot wound. The Zambian police initially accepted Larry's explanation that Bianca was packing a shotgun into its soft case muzzle first when it somehow discharged. But when American forensic consultant Dr. Reva Moss reviewed the Zambian photos sent via consular channels, she noticed something deeply troubling. The entry wound was not consistent with a shot fired downward or inside a bag. It was upward under the left rib cage, angling diagonally toward the heart. No residue on her hands, no burns on her clothes, no defensive injuries. And the barrel, if truly in the bag, would have been blocked from firing cleanly. What Moss saw wasn't an accident. It was a staged scene. Meanwhile, agents began tracing the communication logs Larry had with both Bianca and his office in the weeks prior to the trip. Through a federal subpoena, they pulled phone metadata and email exchanges. One number appeared repeatedly, Lori Milleran. According to dental office payrolls, Lori had been on paid vacation at the time Bianca died, but internal logs showed that she had accessed the office email server 4 times during that week. Her logins weren't to check schedules or billing. She had opened Larry's insurance policy folder from the shared drive. Twice. The agents also interviewed Bianca's closest friend, Marina Oldenburg, who had known the couple for over a decade. Marina's statement under oath was chilling. Bianca didn't want to go on that trip. She told me 3 times she felt something was off. She said Larry insisted that he needed it to clear his head. Marina also revealed that Bianca had once confided in her. She suspected Larry was having an inappropriate relationship with his longtime office manager. Bianca had even told a friend that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted a full autopsy, not just ashes. But she never got that autopsy. Federal investigators then traced the bank transactions connected to the life insurance payouts. Within days of the first check clearing, Larry moved $200,000 into a new private investment account. A second transfer was used to purchase a luxury car under an LLC registered in Nevada, shielding the transaction from public view. Most damning, however, was what happened next. Larry listed Lori Millerin as the sole beneficiary on a newly opened personal account in Arizona. The account was created less than 30 days after Bianca's death. At this point, the working theory shifted. It was no longer just about a suspicious accident. It was about motive, money, control, and the woman he had been involved with for over 15 years. And then came the final blow. In December 2016, an American tourist who had been at a bar in Phoenix came forward, anonymously at first. But what he told the FBI changed everything. He claimed to have overheard a loud argument between a man and a woman just weeks after the cremation. The man, who matched Larry's description, had shouted, "I killed my fucking wife for you." The woman, blonde, mid-50s, turned pale. She whispered something, and they quickly left. The FBI tracked security footage. The date matched. So did the timestamp. The couple? Larry Rudolph and Lori Millerin. It was no longer a question of whether something had gone wrong in Zambia. It was about proving that it had gone exactly as planned. If your spouse died under mysterious circumstances abroad, would you fight for the truth or accept the version that brings closure? What would you need to see before calling it murder? From the moment Bianca Rudolph's ashes cooled in a Pittsburgh funeral home, Larry Rudolph's paper trail began to warm. While the official cause of death in Zambia was still listed as accidental firearm discharge, Larry had already submitted multiple life insurance claims. In total, he sought, and eventually collected, over $4.8 million from 7 separate policies, most of which had been updated or increased not long before the trip to Zambia. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was calculated. At first glance, the insurance forms were in order. The signatures matched, the beneficiaries aligned, and the claims were filed promptly. But the Federal Bureau of Investigation, alerted by a suspicious tip from a friend of Bianca's, found the arrangement too convenient to ignore. That friend, a former hunting companion and close confidant of Bianca's, had doubts about the narrative of an accidental discharge from a shotgun stored in a soft-sided case. She recalled Bianca's firm stance on safety protocols and questioned the logistics of a woman with years of experience mishandling her own weapon. She also remembered Bianca saying one day, offhandedly, "If anything happens to me on one of these trips, it won't be an accident." That line found its way into the FBI's early case brief. Investigators followed the money. Each insurance policy had been incrementally modified in the years leading up to the incident. Some were nearly dormant for years before Larry raised the coverage significantly. One policy, issued by a USA insurer, had increased in value by $500,000 just 6 months before Bianca's death. This wasn't the behavior of someone insuring against risk, it was someone preparing for a windfall. Meanwhile, Larry's relationship with Lori Millerin, his longtime dental office manager and romantic partner, began to take center stage. Witnesses from the dental practice described a known secret between the two. They'd traveled together, dined together, and frequently shared hotel rooms during business conventions. One former staffer put it bluntly, everyone knew. Bianca just didn't want to see it. What's more damning was how quickly Larry resumed life with Lori. In less than 2 months after Bianca's cremation, Lori had reportedly moved in with Larry full-time in Arizona. They were spotted at upscale restaurants, local fundraisers, and even a safari-themed gala. It didn't match the behavior of a grieving widower. It fit the profile of someone who had long planned for a new chapter, one that couldn't begin until Bianca was out of the picture. Yet the key detail wasn't just the affair or the money. It was the timing, the policies, the swift cremation, the flight back to the U.S. less than 48 hours after Bianca died. These weren't the choices of a man caught off guard. They were the steps of someone prepared, someone executing a sequence. In building the timeline, federal agents noticed that on October 11, 2016, the day after Bianca's death, Larry called the U.S. Embassy to report her passing but made no mention of an autopsy. Less than 4 hours later, arrangements were underway for a rapid cremation, even though Zambian authorities had made no official ruling on cause of death. It was an omission, not an oversight. A career in dentistry had trained Larry to focus on precision, but in murder investigations, precision leaves patterns, and patterns leave traces. By late 2017, federal investigators had constructed a preliminary theory of premeditated homicide motivated by financial gain and personal liberation. But they lacked a smoking gun. The Zambian autopsy report was limited. The scene had been compromised, and in the absence of a body, much of the case would hinge on behavior and on motive. Which brought them back, again and again, to the millions of dollars Larry now controlled, and the woman by his side when the dust settled. Some might say, money doesn't buy happiness. In this case, it tried to buy silence, but the paper trail spoke louder. It had been nearly 5 years since Bianca Rudolph's body was flown back from Zambia in an expedited cremation process that now raised more red flags than anyone could count. The case, once thought to be a tragic accident during a safari trip, had metastasized into a federal murder investigation with growing implications that reached across continents and tax brackets. By the spring of 2021, Larry Rudolph was no longer the grieving husband. He was the primary suspect in a homicide case that hinged on motive, financial gain, and cold strategy. The FBI, working alongside the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, had already established that Larry collected a staggering $4.8 million from 5 separate life insurance policies after Bianca's death. The paper trail was clean on the surface, but inconsistencies in the timeline, coupled with testimony from close friends and forensic inconsistencies, opened the floodgates. One detail stood out: the gun. According to Larry, Bianca accidentally shot herself while packing the shotgun into a soft-sided case, but the FBI's firearms expert disputed this. The entry wound, located just above Bianca's heart and angled downward, didn't match an accidental discharge from someone bending over a travel bag. Instead, it was consistent with someone deliberately aiming the weapon. Even more damning, the casing had ejected to a location inconsistent with the alleged angle of discharge, another quiet betrayal from the physical evidence. Then came the internal memo from the U.S. consulate in Zambia. It noted that Larry had insisted on cremation within 72 hours, claiming it was Bianca's wish as a devout Catholic, despite the fact that multiple friends of Bianca, including her dentist and church contacts, testified that she was adamantly against cremation. Larry had provided no written proof of her supposed preference. Investigators now had motive, inconsistency, and a body disposed of before a second medical opinion could be obtained. By mid-2021, prosecutors had shifted attention to Lori Milleron. Subpoenas were issued for all of Lori's communications, including work emails, burner phones, and financial records. Investigators located over a decade's worth of hotel bookings and flight manifests that placed Lori and Larry in the same cities at the same times, often on conference trips that Larry claimed were dental association meetings. This timeline directly contradicted Larry's claims that his affair with Lori was on and off and had ended prior to Bianca's death. More tellingly, the FBI traced a $120,000 transfer from Larry's offshore account to Lori's name within months after Bianca's death. The stated purpose? Consulting. The paper trail didn't match any registered business, and Lori had no valid consulting credentials. That money, investigators alleged, was hush money. But the most damning moment hadn't come from a bank record. It came from a bartender. In April 2022, a Pittsburgh bartender stepped forward under subpoena. He remembered the couple clearly, Larry and Lori, frequent patrons at a high-end steakhouse lounge. One night, the bartender said they got into a heated argument. Voices were raised, and a nearby patron overheard Larry shout, "I killed that thing beak for you." The quote, relayed through a sworn affidavit, was enough for prosecutors to file obstruction and perjury charges against Lori Milleron, alleging she had knowingly covered up a homicide and misled the grand jury during earlier testimony. As the federal grand jury convened in Denver later that year, Larry and Lori were indicted on separate but interlinked charges. Larry for murder and mail fraud, Lori for obstruction, perjury, and being an accessory after the fact. Larry's legal team attempted to file motions to dismiss, claiming jurisdictional overreach since the murder occurred on foreign soil. But under Title 18, Section 11(9) of the U.S. Criminal Code, foreign murder of U.S. nationals, the DOJ made clear that American citizens could be prosecuted for killing other Americans abroad, particularly when the crime involved premeditation and financial fraud against U.S.-based institutions. The motion was denied. The trial would proceed. In interviews, former colleagues of Larry began describing him as arrogant and calculating. He often bragged that no one investigates deaths in Africa. That statement alone, captured in an unrelated deposition from 2018, would resurface during the prosecution's opening statements, a chilling preview of his mindset. As prosecutors pieced together the full mosaic, insurance fraud, a long-term affair, contradictory witness accounts, a rushed cremation, and a foreign jurisdiction, it became clear this wasn't just a murder. This was a logistically orchestrated elimination of a spouse standing in the way of financial and romantic freedom. The courtroom was set, but the public still hadn't heard what the FBI found in the final forensic review of the shotgun. That would come next. By July 2022, the Rudolph case reached a point of no return. The Department of Justice, armed with forensic analysis, banking records, travel data, and witness testimony, filed official charges against Dr. Lawrence Rudolph for the murder of his wife, Bianca. The trial was scheduled to proceed in federal court in Denver, Colorado, under jurisdiction for crimes committed against U.S. nationals abroad. The indictment was not sudden. It was the result of a 6-year timeline painstakingly reconstructed by federal agents, prosecutors, and forensics experts. The evidence against Larry wasn't just circumstantial. It was structured. The government's strategy hinged on proving 3 key elements. 1, that Bianca's death was not accidental. 2, that Larry Rudolph had both motive and opportunity. And 3, that a substantial financial fraud followed the act. From the outset, prosecutors clarified to the jury, this was not a case of misunderstanding or cultural misinterpretation during a safari trip. It was about control, premeditation, fraud. A calculated act to remove an obstacle, his wife, in order to collect multi-million-dollar insurance payouts and live openly with his mistress, Lori Milleron. In the first week of trial, the prosecution focused solely on the forensic inconsistencies. FBI ballistics expert James Hudspeth testified under oath that the physical dimensions and trajectory of the shotgun wound made it physically impossible for Bianca to have accidentally shot herself while packing the firearm. The wound traveled from left to right, downward at a sharp angle, not consistent with a discharge from a person standing upright or leaning over. Moreover, residue patterns on Bianca's hands were inconsistent with her having fired a weapon. A second expert, Dr. Jason T. Moore, lead medical examiner, presented images from the Zambian autopsy along with comparative analysis based on U.S. standards. He concluded the wound had been fired from a minimum distance of 24 inches based on stippling patterns and skin damage. That eliminated the possibility of accidental discharge during handling at close range. Bianca did not fumble. She was targeted. Then came the email records. Federal investigators obtained years of archived communications from Larry's professional accounts. Some were sanitized, others weren't. From 2013 through 2016, dozens of emails referenced upcoming retreats or private conferences, many aligning with Lori Milleron's known travel history. In one email, Larry mentioned to his accountant that he wanted to consolidate expenses this year, especially now that there might be no more obstacles. Though the email didn't name Bianca directly, the timing, just months before her death, and the parallel efforts to increase her insurance coverage raised alarms. By that point, Bianca was insured across 5 different policies totaling $4.8 million. Some had been modified mere weeks before their trip to Zambia. Lori Milleron, indicted separately, but tried alongside Larry for obstruction, false statements, and being an accessory after the fact, appeared in court flanked by federal marshals. She pled not guilty to all charges but refused to take the stand. The government's strategy was not to prove she pulled the trigger, but to show that she benefited from, concealed, and possibly helped coordinate the aftermath. The most decisive moment came on the 10th day of testimony. A bartender from a steakhouse in Scottsdale, Arizona, appeared under subpoena. He recalled a verbal altercation between Larry and Lori in 2020, 4 years after Bianca's death. According to the bartender, Larry yelled at Lori, "I killed that thing beak for you!" The outburst wasn't recorded, but the bartender had filed an anonymous tip with the FBI afterward, which investigators later matched with travel logs placing Larry and Lori at that location on the date in question. His statement was entered under oath, corroborated by employment records, and later supported by a second witness who heard the tail end of the altercation. While the defense attempted to cast doubt, suggesting the bartender misheard or exaggerated, the jury remained focused. The weight of expert testimony, insurance timelines, witness reports, and motive created a tightly woven narrative. Larry's lawyers argued Bianca had previously expressed interest in handling firearms independently. But the jury had seen the autopsy photos. They had reviewed her training level. They had been told that Bianca was a devout Catholic who opposed cremation, and yet her body was cremated just 48 hours after death in Zambia, with no secondary examination. By August 1st, 2022, closing arguments began. Prosecutors laid out their timeline with precision. Larry and Lori began their affair around 2001. Over the next 15 years, Larry increased Bianca's insurance coverage. In 2016, he arranged a trip to Zambia under the guise of a shared passion for hunting. 2 weeks in, Bianca died from a shotgun wound inconsistent with accident. Within 72 hours, she was cremated abroad. In the following months, Larry collected over $4.8 million in payouts. By 2018, Lori had moved into his mansion in Arizona. Intent, execution, profit. It was all there. And as the courtroom fell silent, one could sense a turning point, not just in the trial, but in how financial crimes connected to violence were being evaluated. What began as a safari accident had evolved into one of the most methodically exposed spousal murders with international implications in modern U.S. criminal history. In August 2022, Larry Rudolph stood trial in a Denver federal courtroom accused of murdering his wife, Bianca, during their 2016 safari trip to Zambia. What began as a so-called accidental discharge unraveled into a calculated crime fueled by greed, lust, and deception. Prosecutors dismantled his version using forensic evidence, financial records, and a witness who overheard him say, "I killed my effing wife for you," during an argument with his longtime mistress, Lori Millerin. Digital trails showed Larry had claimed over $4.8 million in life insurance and booked vacations with Lori within weeks of Bianca's cremation, despite her Catholic faith. Forensic experts testified the shotgun wound was inconsistent with a self-inflicted accident. Combined with the rushed cremation and 15-year affair, the jury saw through the lie. The verdict? Guilty. Larry was convicted of murder abroad and mail fraud. Lori, tried separately, was convicted of obstruction, perjury, and being an accessory. In 2023, Larry Rudolph was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lori Millerin received 17 years. Both filed appeals, still pending as of July 2025, but neither has seen freedom again. This case, spanning continents, was one of the most sophisticated insurance-motivated homicides ever tried in U.S. court. But beneath the forensic timelines and legal briefs, it was the story of a woman betrayed by the man she trusted most. In the end, justice caught up to those who thought they could outrun it. And while I didn't live this story myself, if there's one thing I've learned from telling it, it's this. Money may buy comfort, but it cannot bury the truth. No amount of scheming, no affair, no insurance policy is worth the weight of a life taken or the ruin left behind. If you made it this far, I want to hear from you. What does justice look like to you? Do you think sentencing truly reflects the weight of betrayal in this case? If this story moved you or made you reflect, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, tell me why. I read every word. And don't forget, if you value real stories that dig deep, uncover truth, and spark thought, hit that subscribe button and join me for the next case.